Coffee?
Check.
Bible?
Check.
Location?
Doesn't matter.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Benson.
Welcome to the Free Range Church Podcast. On today's podcast,
Judges chapter 7, verses 1 through 3.
a new week, the same old judge.
And coffee's good.
That's the understatement of the year.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about coffee on this podcast in a while. We need to find a time to do another coffee prequel during a series here coming up soon.
Love coffee.
We are in Judges again, the second week of our series in the book of Judges. We are in chapter 7 this morning, continuing with the story of Gideon, beginning in verse 1. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Morah. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained.
Yeah, I love this. I mean, if you don't know the story of Gideon, they put together an army. You should read this chapter. And God just keeps reducing his numbers until he gets down to 300. He goes from 20,000 to 300. Or, sorry, 30,000 to 300. But I love this line in verse 3. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. And I think yesterday was about, permission giving in the way we talk to God, in our honesty, in how we approach things with God.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I think it's about being permission giving as a church to be the church that God has called us to be.
Okay. Say more about that.
Yeah. I was just recently telling a friend about some of our house churches and how I've just kind of hit this point. And we've hit this point because I think that our leaders and the people who are a part of it and myself have just really hit this groove of this is who we are, and this is we're just not going to budge off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling them about some of the big mistakes I've made in these last few years of ministry, which has been to go along with people who were quote unquote on board with what I was doing, but in reality really weren't. Mm. And the amount of grace and tolerance and patience I showed with them without just being real and honest about the problems I saw.
Yeah.
And how just sort of freeing and comforting it is to be in a place where I can tell people, because I had to tell a family the other day, I just don't think this is for you. Mm. There might be a house church out there that's for you. I'm not saying don't do house church. I'm saying Revive House Church is not for you. Because you're looking for something very specific that we don't believe in. And you can come be a part of what we're doing, but this is how we're going to do it. You're going to do it this way with us because we are trying to be faithful in how we do things. Mm-hmm. And man, it just feels really good to be able to say that. And I think a part of it is honestly because I just know, I know the Spirit's working.
Yeah.
I know God is moving. And it makes me think about, how many times we as a church or we as ministry leaders, or even when we just hear our pastors talk, are thinking about what level of tolerance do I need to have around people or with the people in my church or the people around me or the people who want to be a part of this church? Because we feel this is the issue with church. We feel like we need numbers
mm-hmm.
in order to do our work.
Yep. It's the fallacy of if I have a lot of people, I must be doing a good job.
Yeah. And that's what this is what I love about Gideon, right? Those people were in the army. They knew what they were signing up for.
They were willing to die to follow.
Right. Yeah. They were okay, this is the judge God has raised. He is confident in what God wants us to do. We've got an army together. Let's go do this thing. And so they were signed up, and then all of a sudden in this brief moment, God's like, just ask them if they're afraid to leave.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the simplest way of putting that question is like, hey, if you don't really want to be a part of this, like, just don't be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, right, like, I think that's what we're called. I think that voice is just lost today in the church. And here's the thing that I love about the destruction, the downsizing of Gideon's army. Like, they're not chastised.
Yeah.
They're not. Their faithfulness isn't questioned. Their love of the Lord isn't questioned. Their Jewish identity isn't questioned. It's like, hey, listen, if you're afraid, don't be a part of it.
And this is in a military setting. Like, I think that's important, because I think, how the macho image the military has today. Like, I imagine it was probably actually worse back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, when that was the honor you had. Like, your honor was wrapped up in that. Your self-esteem was wrapped up in that. Your place in the community was wrapped up in that. And here, being given permission, to your point, without judgment, without ridicule, without anything, to say, you know what? Go home.
Mm-hmm.
Go home.
Yeah, and so I just think we should have this place. There's like two sides of this coin. Like, we should have a place in our churches today to say, this is what God is calling us to do. If you don't want to be a part of it, that is fine. Because we have a faith and a buy-in and an understanding, like Gideon, that, like, hey, God is with us. God will make this thing happen.
Mm-hmm.
And God will sustain it.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of it, right, like, when the people leave, that's not to say they're horrible or non-believers or weak Christians or anything like that. Like, they might be. Chances are they are. But you don't have to say anything about it either.
No.
And so there's this sort of there's this beautiful call, I think, in this passage that we can answer on either side of it, which is to say, like, sometimes we need to be released to not be in a fight that we don't want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And other times, we need to be comfortable with others being released because they're in a fight that they don't really want to be in.
Yeah.
And I just think here's my, like, ultimate argument about the church today. Like, the church today wants to look at their numbers and then say, okay, now what can we do with these numbers to make an impact, or to grow, or to be considered successful, or to prove how awesome we are. And, like, the result of that, in my opinion, is never good.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually ever do us any good. So why not jump on the Gideon train and become churches that say, this is who we are. Like, this is what we're doing. You can be a part of this, but you also don't have to be. And we're just going to keep going. And I think it's that attitude that forces us, right? That forces us to say, this is the work of God.
Yeah.
This is God moving.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I'm celebrating so much right now at our main campus at Gainesville, because, like, our staff have just been getting together and praying for things. And, like, one of our children's directors just said, like, I wish there were more young families here. We just prayed for young families. And I mean, I think we have had, we have had a significant number of new young families show up at our church. And it was really funny the other day, as I was sharing about this with someone, they're like, how did you do that? Like, how are you doing that coming out of a pandemic?
Yeah.
And I just love being able to say, like, God's just answering prayers. Like, I don't need to explain how it was done. I actually have no interest in explaining how it was done. Like,
well, and the problem is you fall in that trap of trying to explain it. You're doing exactly why God didn't want 30,000 Israelites to take on Midian, because then they'll say it was our strength that did it.
Yeah.
And that, I think, like, this also calls to mind, like, I'm thinking about New Testament parallels. In Matthew's gospel, the end of Matthew 9, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. Like, and what does Jesus say? Jesus doesn't say, go do work. Jesus says, pray that more workers would come. And that, I think, to your point about numbers and about the way we look at the church, like, I don't give a rip how many people are in your pews on Sunday morning or in your couch on your couches. I care about how many people are doing the work. Send me more workers. I don't need spectators. And the reality is, yes, hopefully you turn spectators into workers. Hopefully God will do that. But we need to pray for the workers, not pray to make ourselves look better. And I think that example of young families is a perfect example. Right? Like, the answer to that question is, I didn't do anything. And I'm proud of the fact that I didn't do anything other than pray.
Yeah, I mean, like we should have churches. We should be developing churches. We should be encouraging our churches, pastor, layperson, who, like, you're just a member, whoever you are, right? Like, we should be encouraging our churches to be in ministry in this type of way, right? Which is to say, like, our ministry should be fully reliant on God.
Mm-hmm.
And God will, like, I do not think a ministry can fail when it is relying on God. I know a ministry will fail when it's not relying on God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leave it there for today, friends. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We will see you tomorrow.
Adios.